June 6, 1944. Dawn breaks cold and violent over the beaches of Normandy. Through the smoke and salt spray, a strange sound cuts through the thunder of artillery. Not the growl of tanks, not the roar of bombers, but something lighter, faster, almost mechanical in its rhythm. A fleet of flat-nosed, compact vehicles churns through the surf, their wheels clawing at wet sand, their frames weighted down with ammunition boxes, radio equipment, and wounded men. They are everywhere at once, darting between blown craters, weaving past burned-out hulks, carrying forward what the larger machines cannot. German defenders, dug into concrete bunkers overlooking Omaha Beach, peer through their firing slits and see not the lumbering half-tracks they expected, but these small, relentless machines moving with the agility of cavalry and the persistence of ants. One Wehrmacht officer will later write in his diary, "They are like ghosts. You destroy one, and two more appear from nowhere." This was not a tank. This was not even a proper military vehicle by the standards of 1939. It was a jeep, a machine born not from the minds of generals, but from the drafting tables of American engineers who had been given an impossible task: build a reconnaissance car that weighs less than 1,300 pounds, costs less than $750, and can be delivered in 49 days. What emerged from that challenge would become the most produced military vehicle in history, with over 640,000 units rolling off assembly lines in less than 4 years. But more than that, it became a symbol, a rolling contradiction of everything the Axis powers believed about American softness, American excess, American inability to endure hardship. The Jeep was proof that democracy could outthink dictatorship, that assembly lines could defeat parade grounds, and that the real strength of America was not in its steel, but in its ingenuity. The German Wehrmacht entered the war with a philosophy rooted in the traditions of Prussian militarism: heavy armor, precise doctrine, mechanical superiority measured in tons of steel and caliber of guns. Their reconnaissance units rode motorcycles with sidecars or relied on the Kübelwagen, a vehicle that, while effective, was designed for the autobahns and hard-packed roads of Central Europe. The Japanese Imperial Army, meanwhile, still depended heavily on horses and foot soldiers to move through the jungles of the Pacific, their supply lines stretched thin by terrain that swallowed conventional trucks whole. Both Axis powers looked at American pre-war automobile culture, the chrome-laden sedans, the roadsters, the consumer excess, and saw weakness. They believed that a nation built on comfort could never produce warriors, that factories designed to make luxury would crumble under the demands of war. Then came the Jeep. And with it came a kind of mechanical humiliation. It began in July 1940, when the U.S. Army issued a contract specification that read more like a fever dream than an engineering blueprint. The vehicle had to carry a crew of 3, traverse rough terrain, ford streams, mount a machine gun, and weigh no more than a motorcycle with sidecar. American Bantam Car Company, a small manufacturer on the edge of bankruptcy, took the contract and delivered the first prototype in just 49 days. Willys Overland and Ford soon followed, refining the design into what would become the MB and GPW models, the vehicles we now simply call the Jeep. Stripped of all vanity, the Jeep was a masterpiece of functional brutality. 4-wheel drive. 80-inch wheelbase. A 60-horsepower Go Devil engine that could run on almost anything flammable. Ground clearance high enough to straddle a trench. And a frame so simple that field mechanics could rebuild one with a wrench, a hammer, and a prayer. But what made the Jeep truly fearsome was not its specifications, it was what American soldiers did with it. The Jeep became a platform for adaptation, a mechanical canvas upon which battlefield necessity painted 1,000 variations. In North Africa, British SAS commandos stripped Jeeps down to the frame, mounted twin Vickers K machine guns on the rear, and used them for lightning raids behind German lines, striking fuel depots and airfields before vanishing into the desert. In the Italian mountains, American infantry units welded steel plates to the front and used Jeeps as battering rams to clear roadblocks. In the Pacific, Marines mounted flamethrowers and rocket launchers on Jeep chassis and turned them into mobile fire support platforms that could navigate jungle trails no tank could reach. The Germans had designed their vehicles for a war they imagined. The Americans had designed a vehicle that could fight any war. German soldiers captured in France during the summer of 1944 spoke of the Jeep with a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. Interrogation reports from the Allied tactical interrogation units record one Panzer grenadier saying, "We would hear them before we saw them, always moving, always somewhere else. You could destroy 10, and there would be 20 more by morning. It was like fighting the wind." Another German report, filed by a logistics officer in Normandy, noted that American supply columns moved at 3 times the speed of German equivalents, not because of better roads or air superiority, but because every vehicle in their army can go anywhere, carry anything, and they waste nothing. This was the ideological wound the Jeep inflicted. It proved that American industrial democracy, with its mess of competing companies and lack of central planning, could outproduce and out-innovate the carefully controlled war economies of fascism. The symbolic power of the Jeep extended beyond the battlefield. When American forces liberated towns in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, it was not tanks that the crowd surrounded, it was Jeeps. Photographs from the liberation of Paris show children clinging to the hoods, women throwing flowers onto the seats, men reaching out to touch the vehicles as if they were holy relics. The Jeep represented something more than military might. It represented abundance. In a Europe starved and brutalized by years of rationing and occupation, the sight of endless columns of identical vehicles, all painted the same olive drab, all moving with mechanical certainty, was a vision of a world where resources were infinite, where production was limitless, where freedom itself had been mass-produced. The Japanese, too, learned to fear the Jeep, though for different reasons. In the jungles of Burma, New Guinea, and the Philippines, Japanese soldiers accustomed to moving on foot or by barge encountered American Jeep-mounted patrols that could cover in one day what took an infantry battalion a week. The Jeep's ability to ford rivers, climb mud-slick trails, and haul supplies through terrain that destroyed conventional trucks shattered Japanese assumptions about the limits of mechanized warfare in tropical environments. One captured Japanese intelligence report from late 1944 described the Jeep as the American soldier's iron horse. It eats nothing, complains never, and goes where no man should follow. But perhaps the most profound transformation the Jeep wrought was not on the enemy, but on the American soldier himself. Before the war, the United States Army had been a small, underfunded force that still relied on horses for transport and mules for artillery traction. The average American draftee in 1941 had grown up on a farm or in a small town, with little exposure to modern machinery. The Jeep became their teacher. It taught them that machines were not fragile, that complexity could be mastered, that maintenance was a form of power. A study conducted by the U.S. Army Ordnance Department in 1945 found that soldiers who served in Jeep-mounted units returned home with technical skills that translated directly into civilian employment: mechanics, drivers, logistics coordinators. The Jeep had not just won battles, it had trained a generation. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, the Jeep had become ubiquitous, so common that it seemed to have always existed, as if the battlefields of Europe had conjured it from necessity itself. Soviet soldiers advancing from the east drove American-supplied Jeeps through the ruins of Berlin. British commandos used them in Norway and Greece. Free French forces painted them in tricolor and drove them up the Champs-Élysées. Even the Germans, in the final chaotic months of the war, pressed captured Jeeps into service, repainting them with Wehrmacht crosses and using them to flee the advancing Allies. The machine designed to be expendable had become indispensable. In the years after the war, the Jeep's legend only grew. Surplus military Jeeps flooded the civilian market, and farmers, ranchers, and rural workers snapped them up, recognizing in that flat-nosed profile a tool that could do anything. The Jeep became the ancestor of the modern SUV, the spiritual father of every off-road vehicle that followed. But more than that, it became a monument, a reminder that wars are not won by the heaviest armor or the biggest guns, but by the ability to adapt, to improvise, to build something simple enough to mass-produce and versatile enough to survive anything. There is a photograph, taken somewhere in Germany in the spring of 1945, that captures the essence of what the Jeep meant. It shows a mud-caked Jeep parked in front of a destroyed Tiger II tank, one of the most fearsome machines the Wehrmacht ever built, 70 tons of steel and fury, now a burned-out carcass. The Jeep is dwarfed by the Tiger's shadow, barely reaching the top of its tracks. But the Jeep is intact. The Jeep is running. And sitting on its hood is a young American soldier, eating from a can of rations, his rifle leaning against the fender, his face weary but alive. The Tiger had been designed to dominate. The Jeep had been designed to endure. And in the end, endurance had won. The Jeep was never meant to be feared. It was meant to be everywhere, carrying supplies, towing artillery, evacuating wounded, leading charges, fleeing ambushes, broadcasting propaganda, hauling prisoners, mounting guns, and doing 10,000 other tasks that no one had imagined when the first blueprints were drawn. But in being everywhere, it became inescapable. And in being inescapable, it became a kind of haunting, a constant grinding reminder that the enemy could not match American production, could not stop American logistics, could not outlast American persistence. The Germans had their Panzers, the Japanese had their Bushido code, but America had the Jeep. And in the arithmetic of total war, the Jeep was the equation that could not be solved. Years later, a German veteran was asked what moment during the war made him realize that Germany would lose. He did not speak of D-Day, or the fall of Stalingrad, or the bombing of Berlin. He spoke of a day in late 1944, somewhere in the forests of the Ardennes, when his unit ambushed an American convoy. They destroyed the lead vehicle, a truck, and the convoy stopped. But within minutes, Jeeps appeared from every direction, flanking, probing, radioing coordinates. His unit retreated. Hours later, The same convoy passed through, the destroyed truck already replaced, the column moving as if nothing had happened. That was when I knew, he said. They had so many of everything that losing meant nothing to them. We were fighting a machine that could not be broken, because it had no pride to wound. And so the Jeep endures, not as a relic, but as a truth. It stands as proof that freedom's greatest weapon is not the sword, but the wrench. Not the doctrine, but the drafting table. Not the general, but the engineer. In the end, the war was won not by those who could build the biggest, but by those who could build the most, the fastest, and the best. The Jeep was that truth made manifest. Small, simple, unstoppable. The most feared machine on the Western Front was not a machine of war at all. It was a machine of everything.